Well, let's talk about George Gascon. I think you mentioned that he is the term he likes to describe himself by is it, quote, progressive?
That's a term that's used. I don't know if it fits, but that's a term that's used.
Okay. But he has been supported, I believe, by George Soros. Also, I think that Kamala Harris, Newsom, and Elizabeth Warren, the senator out of Massachusetts, all support him.
Don't forget Schiff.
And Schiff,
and people like that.
Who is one who's actually from Los Angeles area, but these others are all outside of Los Angeles, ironically, supporting a progressive prosecutor. So with George Gascon, there is a recall effort underway with him, as to him. What's the status of that?
The status of the recall effort is the people behind it got 190,000 more signatures than they needed to qualify. Now, in any such effort, you're going to have certain signatures on petitions that are invalid. Mm-hmm. The registrar recorder, through certain policy decisions and his review, which was very flawed, by the way, mm-hmm. of the petitions, said no, it fell 40,000 short. Well, a number of people couldn't quite believe that, and they were right in not quite believing that, because since last November, a number of volunteers and other people have donated money to really cause a very intense review of the registrar recorder's decisions regarding the signatures that were produced. You know what they found? The voter rolls were hugely bloated because the registrar recorder had not followed the dictates of a lawsuit saying you must purge your voter rolls of people that are like dead, have moved out of state, have not voted in 3 consecutive federal elections. That's the law. Our registrar recorder had not gotten around to doing that. So when you have, let's say, 500,000 voters on the rolls that shouldn't be there, that makes your requirement for the 10% of signatures increased by 50,000, because you're required to get 10% of all registered voters to sign a petition.
And this
for
would
recall.
be the registered voters in the county of
the county,
Los
yeah.
Angeles.
And so, because LA County negligently, intentionally, ineptly did not purge their voter rolls, the recall proponents were required to get more signatures than they actually should have had to get. That's just part one. And the rest of it is they made huge mistakes, and they invalidated many signatures which were perfectly valid mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. by true registered voters in LA County because of the way they executed their duties. For example, if this is just one small example, but there's many other examples. If someone never really learned script writing, they don't have a signature in that way. So what they do is they print their name. That's how they legally write their name. They print it. Mm-hmm. If someone down at the clerk's office sees, oh, it's a printed name, they didn't sign it, well, I'm going to disqualify it. No, wait a second. That's how they write their name. But they would disqualify it. There were examples like that. On the form itself, it said, print your name and your residence address, okay? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you could be a valid registered voter. You print your name, you sign it, the signature's right. But let's say you had moved and you put your residence address on the form itself.
The current residence address.
Your current residence address. If it does not match your registered address, they would kick that out. That's thousands. So policy decisions were made, discrete individual decisions were made, there were mistakes made over and over and over again by the registrar recorder, the way they reviewed those petitions. I think that the registrar recorder never thought there would be a challenge, that no one would go down there and take the time over many months to review those petitions. They thought they would get away with it. Well, I don't think they're going to get away with it, because there's probably going to be a lawsuit filed to get a writ of mandate that forces a court to make the decision as to whether or not there were enough valid signatures or not. And I think that's going to be a very interesting lawsuit, unprecedented probably in electoral history, at least in California, where the decision made by a governmental official you should have faith in will be overturned by some very dedicated volunteers who just did the hard work of double checking what they did down there in Norwalk at the registrar's office.
Well, this now triggers voter integrity, and the numbers. I believe on the petition for recall, there was roughly 700,000 plus signatures collected, and
they needed 566,000,
which was an inflated number because they hadn't purged the rolls, so something less than that. And they invalidated, the registrar's office invalidated almost 200,000.
I can't remember all the numbers, but somewhere along those lines.
It's a huge number.
It was huge.
Huge number.
It was huge.
So, yeah.
And now we're finding out that it shouldn't have been that huge. They made a lot of mistakes. They invalidated perfectly valid signatures by real registered voters. So, yeah, it shouldn't have been that huge.
So you mentioned, is there a lawsuit pending now, or
there's a lawsuit pending now? It's in. There was an injunction brought by the recall committee against the registrar recorder. That is an ongoing matter in front of Judge Chalfant in the Ritz Court, and so far the recall proponents have been very successful in court, forcing the registrar recorder to stop slow walking it, interfering with it. So thank goodness there was a judge to keep these guys honest. By these guys, I mean the registrar recorder's office. And ultimately, after an appeal taken by the registrar recorder is resolved, there will be a writ of mandate filed, which is a separate legal matter, and that is really to have a court order the registrar recorder to certify the election, because in fact enough signatures have been gathered. And then the County Board of Supervisors, once a recall election is certified, will have to place it on the ballot. And then we find out about whether Mr. Gascon's progressive policies are accepted here in Los Angeles County, or is he going to be rejected.
So this is 2023. In the normal course of things, if he's not recalled, when does his term expire?
His term would expire, well, assuming he's not recalled, because once you're recalled and it succeeds, you lose power immediately upon certification of the recall election. So assuming he's not thrown out by recall, he would be up for and he's actually campaigning now, for the primary in March of 2024, and assuming he's one of the top two, he would be up for election in November of 2024. It's theoretically possible, I know this is crazy, but it's theoretically possible he could be nominated as a candidate for district attorney in the primary election and recalled in the same election. It's crazy.
It's one of the peculiarities of the recall law.
But it's peculiar because there's never been a recall of a constitutional officer in Los Angeles County in 170 years. He's the first one up to actually face a serious recall where it is likely he will be recalled. Never been done before. So,
Governor's been recalled. The DA in San Francisco has been recalled. I think there's been one or two other recalls in the history.
About Los Angeles County.
Not Los Angeles.
Constitutional officers. We've been around since 1850. There's 3 constitutional officers: assessor, DA, sheriff. None of them has ever been recalled in Los Angeles County since 1850. You do the math.
That's been a while.
73 years.
Been a while.
Yeah.
So if let's say if the target date is to get the recall scheduled for March of 2024, that's also the primary. So and a recall, I think, even though the petition to get it scheduled requires 10% valid signatures, the actual recall is by majority vote.
Yeah. Well, it's well, under the old system, they would have what they call a substitution election, and there would be a list of people who wanted to be the district attorney, who paid the fee, whatever, and then there would be a plurality. Whoever got the most out of that. Remember Schwarzenegger?
Remember?
There are 134 people that applied to be governor, and he got the most. Plurality. He had a big plurality, but it was a plurality.
But that's the second.
To recall
that's the
someone,
second
all it
half.
takes is
Right.
50% plus
Right.
one vote.
Right. And then if it's 50% plus one on the recall, then you get down to the 134 or however many people are running for the office.
Well, except the legislature, our great legislature, decided to change the rules, and no longer is there an opportunity for the public to select the replacement, assuming the official is recalled. Now, what happens is the Board of Supervisors appoints an interim if someone is recalled. So let's say Gascon gets recalled, say in March. Once that recall election is certified and he is recalled by 50% plus one vote, then he is out of office, he loses all power, he has no more authority, and he cannot run in the general election, assuming he's the top two, with the title district attorney. And the board would appoint some sort of a caretaker and interim district attorney to discharge those duties until there's an election and a certified election.
He could win the primary, he's recalled, but the recall itself does not qualify him for standing for the general election. Is that apparently?
Yeah, that's the way it would work.
All right. But it does disqualify the LA County Board of Supervisors from appointing him to be the interim DA.
No, well, yeah. They couldn't appoint him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
No, he's out. He's out. He's not in the game. He's not in the game. He's gone.
So I guess we're saying then, and I don't know if many people know this, but there probably is a general impression that if someone is recalled, that's kind of permanent disqualification from holding that office. But that's just not true in California.
No, it's not true in California.
Yeah.
Well, you're disqualified from that office for that term.
Right.
And you can run again and be elected again if the public is willing to make that mistake again. I don't think they are. All the polling I see and hear about is that he is one of the most disfavored elected officials in LA County history, if not California.
Well, I want to come back to this because there seems to be he has a huge support from Governor Newsom, who's not from Southern California. Big support for someone like Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts. Apparently financial support from a lot of people outside of Los Angeles County, but the citizens...
Big support from George Soros.
Yes.
Millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Yes.
Soros and his little clique of buddies and fellow traveler type people. Yeah.
My point, though, is that they're not County of Los Angeles voters, but yet here we have this support from outside of the county, but the voters in County of Los Angeles who are dealing with the repercussions of this rising crime rate have a different attitude. I think
you
is what you're
got to
saying.
remember, Newsom appointed Gascon with no experience as a lawyer or as a prosecutor to be the DA of San Francisco. So they're kind of like buddies. But Newsom, in my view, is the kind of person, he is such a politician, when he sees Gascon's stock going down, he'll avert his eyes. Just like I think Mayor Bass. I don't think she's going to be a supporter of Gascon when she reads the polls and see how disfavored he is.
Mm-hmm.
She won't touch him with a 10-foot pole. Even someone as shifty as Schiff will no longer be in his corner.
Well, but I want to dwell on this point for just a minute because to the extent that we're talking about some type of effective voter nullification of the voters in Los Angeles County by the powers that be and the money that be that comes from outside the County of Los Angeles. There's something about that bothers me. This should be a Los Angeles County issue, but yet we have these levers being pulled by powers and monies that are outside the county.
George Soros's master plan is much bigger than Los Angeles County. But Los Angeles County was the big elephant for him to capture. It's one thing to have your way up in San Francisco with 700,000 people. But LA County, the largest, most populous county in the United States of America by far, was the big elephant. They got Chicago with Kim Foxx. It's a complete loser. They got the Attorney General of New York, complete loser. They got this guy in Manhattan, New York, complete disaster. But he's actually gotten people in because the money he brings into it from outside does impact those voters, especially the uninformed voters who may be influenced by a cleverly written ad against an incumbent and for a George Gascon or someone of that nature. So, but I think the public is waking up. I think that they're starting to figure out how this is happening to them, why their justice system becomes a mess, an embarrassment, something to be mocked. And they go, you know what, maybe we made a mistake with that Gascon guy, or with somebody else, Philadelphia, St. Louis. Some of them are waking up. San Francisco woke up, got rid of that loser.
One thing I think that confuses just the common man and woman on the street is how someone who has a philosophy that that allows the crime rates to increase, more people on the street rather than being put away so that they can't commit crimes, and the prosecutor is content and thinks that's some type of social progress. But if you're the individual who is having to close your store because you're suffering smash or grabs, or you're the homeowner that is being broken into and you're losing your family wealth through these thefts and burglaries, then we have an issue where what I have to ask the basic question: what do these people think? I'm talking about the prosecutors. What are they trying to achieve? You would conclude that they're not looking out for the quote victims, or do they even not even consider these homeowners or these businesses to be victims? It's a very confusing situation.
Well, let's start with victims. That's a good place to start. I particularly care about next of kin of murder victims. When you lose a loved one to a violent act of murder, and some of them are particularly brutal, and then the district attorney, who's supposed to be, by law and by the Constitution, assisting you at parole hearings, says, no, I forbid my prosecutors from assisting a victim at a parole hearing. I forbid my prosecutors from writing the parole hearings regarding the nature of the crime. As a matter of fact, my prosecutors cannot do anything after the sentencing of an individual for a crime. They're not to be involved. That's sort of abandoning victims. When a mother has to go to a parole hearing by herself to face the murderer of her child, and he's got a lawyer, and she has to confront the murderer and the lawyer without any help from the district attorney or the prosecutor, that is a tragedy. That is a complete failure. And that is what happens in Los Angeles County. That is his policy. That's what he does. That's the reason so many victims and legitimate victims groups are fighting for his recall, because he's abandoned them every which way. He couldn't have done anything more. He's trying to get certain murderers resentenced to lesser terms.
Then what's coming back? What's the end game? Because most people, including myself, would think that the purpose of a district attorney is there to enforce the laws, and that is to keep law violators away from the public.
Yeah, that's kind of what you'd think they would do. That's in the government code, by the way. That's in the Constitution.
So what's his end game? I mean,
I don't
what's his
know.
goal?
If I could get in George Gascon's head, I would be accomplishing something I think no one's really been able to do. If I could get in George Soros's head, that would be something else, because he is funding all this, billions of dollars, to change the way American jurisprudence works when it comes to criminal law. I can't get inside their head. All I know is the results are horrible for the law-abiding public across the board, just horrible. The system's not working. The district attorney has turned against the law-abiding public on the one hand, and the true victims and victims next of kin on the other. He's turned against them. The system is upside down with a guy like this in office. And what motivates him? God only knows.
What groups and individuals here in LA are in favor of the recall?
Oh, I think law enforcement, for starters. George Gascon has ordered his prosecutors to not file legitimate, lawful arrest and provable crimes in like 9 different categories of misdemeanors. Those resisting arrest, a drunken public, simple possession of drugs, things of that nature, trespass. His prosecutors cannot file those crimes. That really denigrates communities. That's a quality of life issue. And he has told his prosecutors, don't file them. So that affects misdemeanors in 78 cities and unincorporated parts of the county of Los Angeles. Law enforcement, they know. They're on the front lines. They're seeing their good arrests be treated as worthless. They see their crimes, violent crimes in many cases, committed by recidivists, not properly filed. They see juvenile crimes not properly filed. If there are cases of young hoodlums over the age of 16 who commit armed robberies, stick a real gun in a real victim's face and steal their stuff. You cannot get a robbery filed against that juvenile offender. They cannot file strike offenses against juveniles. So what do the DAs have to do? They have to file some other phony baloney crime like theft from a person. They can't file an armed robbery because it's a strike. This is craziness. And then enhancements. You can't file enhancements. You can't file priors. You can't file strikes. So you end up with a phony charge that doesn't represent the true crime and the facts of that crime and the record of the defendant. Because he wants to reduce the potential for the ultimate sentence a court may impose. He does not want a long sentence. He wants decarceration through kind of like deprosecution. That's the way it works. They do it all through the exercise of his quote-unquote prosecutorial discretion.
Well, what's the attitude of the rank and file prosecutors in the DA's office?
Los Angeles County has a civil service system in terms of all of its employees, and that includes the prosecutors. The prosecutors of that office, for the most part, the vast majority, are dedicated professionals who know their craft, and they are committed to accurately enforcing the laws of California, which is the oath that they took, okay? They had a plebiscite to determine whether or not they, the rank and file prosecutors, should support the recall. It was 97.3% of the prosecutors who participated in that plebiscite, which was the largest turnout ever in their history, voted to support the recall. They think he should be recalled.
What about the Los Angeles County Sheriff? What's his attitude on the recall?
I know the last sheriff was very supportive of the recall. The current sheriff, I don't think he's really, I think he's consciously not taken a position at this point. I think the more he's around and the more he sees the actual results of Gascon's policies, I think he'll become a recall supporter. If he doesn't, then he is just putting his head in the sand. But I have faith that he'll listen to others in the law enforcement world. He'll listen to the victims groups. He'll see the results of Gascon's policies. Maybe when a couple of his deputies get murdered by someone who's out that should be in, and then maybe he'll have a nirvana and he'll say, you know what, this guy's got to go.
Well, you made an interesting point. Regardless of what happens to the recall, assuming that he wants to run again, and putting the whole recall thing aside, he stands for re-election in November of 20.
He's already out there. He's been out there for a year campaigning. He's raising money. His ads, his solicitations are out there all the time.
Well, within Los Angeles County, who supports his campaign?
I don't know. I don't know who supports within Los Angeles County. The last time he got elected because he got huge financial support from George Soros in the millions of dollars, and others of George Soros's ilk, almost all of whom were outside of Los Angeles. They were from the Bay Area or elsewhere, but who are advancing a view of the world, not just the candidacy of Gascon, he's the puppet, but they were advancing their view of the world when it comes to criminal justice. And so he had a lot of money against poor Jackie Lacey, who did it the old-fashioned way, just trying to get support from the people in the county. She didn't have any great benefactors.
We haven't really, other than referring to strikes, we haven't talked much about three strikes. Why don't you talk a little bit about what three strikes is, how it works, whether it's been successful, failure? You mentioned that there has been I think at some point a nice change to three strikes. That's my interpretation of what you said, but let's visit that subject for a moment.
Okay, three strikes was a law that in essence provided the following. If you had two or more qualifying convictions, which means convictions for a serious or a violent felony, that a conviction for any new felony, you could receive a sentence of 25 to life, okay? It also had a second strike component. A second strike component was if you had a prior conviction of one serious or violent prior, then as a second striker, the law mandated you go to prison, and that the term, the ordinary term for that offense could be doubled, and you had to serve 85% of that time imposed by the court. That was the original three strikes law. Powerful, very powerful, and in some quarters abused by prosecutors because they were putting people in for 25 to life for stealing a cassette or some other minor offense that, quote unquote, was a felony, two-bit forgery, something like that. Felony, 25 to life? No. It was disproportionate, and it was not being even-handedly applied because it was such a powerful law.
Right.
Well, the public, in their wisdom, modified the law, kept it in place, but they basically, through Prop 36, said, we like three strikes, 25 to life, for that serious and violent recidivist offender who commits a new serious and violent felony, yes. But for those who commit non-serious, non-violent felonies, they should be prosecuted under the auspices of the second strike law, which provides for doubling the sentence, mandatory state prison, and you must do 85% of the time imposed by the court. That was a very thoughtful modification of the three strikes law. Now, why was it put forth? It It was put forth by people who wanted to save the three strikes law. The three strikes law had barely survived being declared unconstitutional by the California Supreme Court. It was declared unconstitutional by the Ninth Circuit. It was only upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court on a 4-4-1 vote. Doesn't get any closer than that.
It's close.
4-4-1, that's it. That's as close as you can get. So smart people who wanted to save three strikes and its benefits in going after the serious and violent felonies proposed that amendment, which passed overwhelmingly because the public understood they wanted their three strikes law, but they did not want it to be abused by prosecutors. And there were people out there who really, I don't know, they're just unsophisticated or ideological, but they didn't want to see any change in the three strikes law. Apparently they weren't paying attention to how the three strikes law was being challenged over and over again in the courts and elsewhere and by way of initiative because it was being abused. So there was a solution, and the people saved three strikes. It does work, except it does not work if the prosecutor doesn't allege the strikes. George Gascon won't allege the strikes. So it doesn't exist in LA County. It doesn't exist.
So you have a local prosecutor, in this case a district attorney, that's basically writing out of the law books, the penal code, a statute that was approved by the state legislature and the people of California.
Overwhelmingly. The people approved it overwhelmingly. The three strikes law was a proposition, and it was amended by way of initiative, and amended by way of initiative. This is the people voting. And this is in the Constitution. This is not something like, some state legislative thing. This is in the Constitution, and he ignores it. There's something about that I find greatly offensive when someone takes the oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America, the Constitution of the state of California, and the laws of the state of California, and then immediately ignores them and does his own thing.
Well,
There's something very offensive about that.
Now, kind of the next question, of course, is impeachment, which is different from recall.
I don't think there is impeachment available.
That's my question. Is there an
I don't
impeachment?
think there's impeachment for recall is the only remedy to get rid of an errant public official
In California.
in California. Yeah. But the other way is vote them out, get rid of them, send them the way of others where the voters have woken up and realized this is not my best interest when the quality of my neighborhood is being seriously diminished. Oh yeah, and I'm endangered, my family's much more in danger because of this guy. Get rid of him. Just get rid of him, vote him out, wake up.
Steve Cooley, where do we go from here?
Well, we vote Gascon out or we recall him. That'd be a good start. And there's other things we can do too.
Before we go, you'd mentioned the mental health issue. How does that impact crime in Los Angeles and California as a whole, and what's being done about it?
There are people who are mentally ill who commit crimes. We see it on television constantly all across our country. There are people who are mentally ill, clearly mentally ill, who do things like shove people in front of subway trains or hit people senselessly or attack people just because they happen to be a different ethnicity. And these are mentally ill people. And they do other things that are manifestations that are mental illness. In California, and I think probably in other states, many other states, they have not funded mental health in terms of institutions where people can be kept away from the public that they would tend to harm. These are people with serious mental illnesses, psychoses, and things of that nature that make them dangerous. But ever since the Lanterman-Petra Short Act, It's very, very, very difficult.
Second time you mentioned that act. Tell us about it.
Okay. Lanterman-Petrus Short Act was enacted, I think, right around the time of Reagan coming into office. It was pushed by a guy named Frank Lanterman, who I think was a Republican, if I'm not mistaken, from La Cañada, Flint Ridge. He was very empathetic towards people with mental illness because his brother was mentally ill. Mm-hmm. And they greatly restricted the ability of the state to detain someone or keep someone in a custodial setting to deal with their mental illness. Mm-hmm. And they were going to build out outpatient mental health facilities to deal with that component of society. So places like Camarillo and other state hospitals were closed. And that went away. And they never did really, they meaning government, never really did build out adequately outpatient mental health facilities that could deal with some of the very mentally ill people that we see on our streets. In some instances, they're committing crimes. In other instances, they're self-medicating because that's how they get through life, I guess. Mm-hmm. So I think that was it's a failure of government. Either didn't want to invest the money, or they just felt there's another way to handle this component in our society. So that's where we are right now. And I think some people are starting to think, you know what, we have to have some capacity to put some of these people in a custodial setting or a lockdown setting where they can be actually treated for their mental illness. And I think a lot of our homeless population are mentally ill people, and a lot of them are people who are just very drug addicted. They're just, they live with their drugs, whatever their drug of choice may be, and they're a huge component of the homeless population. And I think that another component here in Southern California is we got good weather. If you're going to be homeless, man, you're going to have a tent, and you're going to be living in a tent, better off being in LA where the weather's pretty good, Mediterranean type temperature. It doesn't rain too often, at least not every year. And as opposed to being in some freezing place like Chicago, so we're like a magnet. We've attracted a lot of other people's homeless-prone people out here, or the unhoused, as they call them.
Has anybody done any studies to correlate the increase of the homeless population with the increase in crime rates?
I think I think Prop 47 has been a great increase in the homeless situation crisis that we have, because law enforcement isn't able to really arrest people who have their drug addictions and put them in the system. And the system's very forgiving of people with drug problems. There's all sorts, there's diversion, there's this, there's that, there's probation. There's all kinds of ways to say, hey, look, we're the government, we're here to help you. And we got programs. And we're going to have to maybe lock you up if you don't get in the programs. A lot of these people, they get the message and they deal with their issues. But can't do that anymore. Prop 47. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Police can't arrest based upon probable cause because it's not a felony anymore. Has to be an offense occurring in their presence. That's what's required for a misdemeanor arrest. Mm-hmm. So that way to enforce laws against a population that really needs to be dealt with, gone. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. By the way, let's talk about Prop 47 one more time. We have Prop 47 because Kamala Harris is dishonest and disreputable. She was the Attorney General, and when she was tasked with giving Prop 47 a title, she called it like the Safe Communities and Safer Streets Act. Well, that's really a nice title, and it was complete BS, and the public fell for it, and they bought into this horrible Prop 47, which greatly denigrated the penal code when it came to dealing with theft, and totally reduced hard drugs to misdemeanors.
Well, let me ask you this, just as we get ready to close. This is your wish list, and I realize it's a wish list. And based upon your comments, you realize that, at least in the short term anyway, it's not realistic. But if you could have the state legislature and the people of California to make changes in the next year to address these increasing problems, what would you recommend to the state legislature and to the California people
I know
what they
this
should
may
do?
sound regressive.
That's right. Tell me.
Get rid of 57. Restore the determinate sentence law to what it was, which was very, very effective. 47, make it go bye-bye. It's been a disaster. Nothing good has come out of 47. And AB 109, the state of California should get back into their historic responsibility of housing people sentenced to state prison, where they have adequate facilities and they actually have the programs to help the people, as opposed to putting them in the jail system, which was not designed for people with the longer terms. So get rid of those three things. Mm-hmm. Those are the three legs on a horrible stool. Mm-hmm. Get rid of those three things. And then, other part of my wish list, get over the constant abuse of law enforcement and the unnecessary criticism of our law enforcement officers because of people like this jerk Bragg back in New York and others. Who really wants to be in law enforcement? Who really wants to be there if you're not respected and you face an improper prosecution by a rogue DA? Mm-hmm. So that's why law enforcement is having a terrible time recruiting. And partly it's because it's not considered to be a highly regarded profession anymore. It's being denigrated. And the defund the police movement, completely asinine. And the decarceration movement, completely dangerous. So maybe stop some of those movements that have put us all in danger.
Well, in Los Angeles, both with the LAPD and also with the sheriff's office, are there enough candidates in the pipeline to fill all the authorized positions in those two forces?
I hear there aren't. They're both law enforcement agencies across the country are now getting so desperate they're offering bonuses and housing and all sorts of other things to entice qualified candidates to consider applying to become a police officer. And I understand that they aren't meeting their quotas. The sheriffs are not meeting their quotas. LAPD is not meeting their quotas. And that's being replicated across the country. And also remember, in Los Angeles County, we've got 45 other police agencies. Long Beach, Arcadia, we got 46 cities with municipal police agencies. They are having a hard time recruiting. And you can't forget them because they patrol and protect 1/3 of Los Angeles County's residences in terms of policing. And you can't forget them. Mm-hmm. They're also suffering. And then you take that, I'm pretty sure it's replicated throughout California mm-hmm. because it's more of a societal thing than it is just a regional thing.
Well, I'm hearing you loud and clear, and this comes back to your point that we need good laws and good prosecutors.
And good cops and good judges.
And good judges.
Yeah.
And, well, that's good advice to the people of California and the people of Los Angeles.
We'll see if they take it.
Steve Cooley.
All right.
Thank you very much. I appreciated your time.
All right.